Hello, this is Mr. DeCoco with video lesson number 9. This is the lesson for Tuesday, April 21st. This is the 9th video lesson. And in this 9th video lesson, I just want to recap some of the things you learned about last class or last video lesson. And then I want to introduce the concepts of sectionalism and foreign affairs. Two new topics that you'll find in chapter 10, section 3. So last video lesson, you learned of two main points, two key themes. The first one was that advances in transportation made it easier than ever for Americans to settle west and to bring raw materials from the west and resources from the west to the factories of the east. The advances included steamships, canals, specifically the Erie Canal, and a whole series of roads, the main one being the National Road. Another key theme is that the United States grew even more, and from 1800 to 1821, 5 new states were created in the West. The states of Indiana, Illinois, Mississippi, Alabama, and Missouri were created because of the major increase in population in those areas. They went very quickly from being territories to states. Even states that already existed grew tremendously. For example, Ohio, which had been a state before this, grew from 45,000 people to 581,000 people in just 20 years. So this gives you an idea of what was going on in the United States back then. Technology was getting better, it was getting easier to move around. The North was becoming more technologically advanced and more industrial and more focused on manufacturing. And new states were being created and old ones were growing. So that was last lesson. Now this lesson, we want to tie that into the new stuff, the new information, if you will. The growth of the West and the industrialization of the North and the agricultural way of life of the South is going to eventually lead to a thing called sectionalism. Sectionalism is a word that means loyalty to a region. Because Americans could classify themselves as living in either the North, the South, or the West, they started to become more loyal, it seemed. Not all Americans, but many Americans became more loyal to the section of the country they lived in rather than the country itself, which is why we get the word sectionalism. Now, why did people start thinking that way? Why did they start behaving this way? Well, one of the reasons was that many people in the North or the South or the West felt that their way of life was the best way of life. They liked their region. They liked how they made a living, how income was generated, how people went about their daily lives. And they favored laws and wanted laws that benefited their way of life. Sometimes another region's way of life and the laws they wanted might go against what maybe you wanted. So to get a little more specific, some of the things that the regions disagreed on. In the North, people wanted high tariffs. That made foreign goods more expensive and American goods less expensive. That would encourage Americans to buy goods, and since all the goods in America practically were made in the North, that would benefit the North. The South, on the other hand, hated tariffs because that made products more expensive. And they didn't mind buying from the North, but they didn't like spending more for Northern products when they can get those products cheaper from other countries. Also in the South, they focused on states' rights, especially due to the fact that they wanted to protect slavery. As time went on, the South was becoming more and more reliant on slavery, while at the same time, the North was speaking out against it. And the South was starting to get very, very defensive over this. So they preached states' rights. If you lived in the West, you probably would heavily favor internal improvements. Now, Internal improvements are things that um, uh, that make the development of transportation better. For example, internal improvements could be the construction of roads, the construction of canals. People in the West wanted this because it would make it easier for goods, services, and people to travel from the West to mostly the North and and also the South. So in the North, you have Daniel Webster. He's the unofficial spokesman of the North. He was a senator from Massachusetts. In the South, the unofficial spokesman was John C. Calhoun. He was from the state of South Carolina. He was a big proponent of states' rights. And then in the West, um, a man named Henry Clay would come to represent that region. So, of all the differences, I mentioned tariffs, uh, internal improvements, states' rights. Um, the biggest issue at this time, the issue that was growing and threatening to really divide the country, was the issue of states' rights, which stemmed right out of the argument over slavery. In 1820, it looked like the country could fall apart over this issue. Um, a territory was getting ready to become a state, and that was the state of Missouri. And the big argument was whether Missouri should be a slave state or a free state. Well, obviously the South wanted to be slave and the North wanted to be free, but it couldn't be both. It had to be one or the other. So before the arguments could literally tear the country apart, Henry Clay stepped in with a plan. His plan was a compromise. It was a plan that would include something that made the North happy, something that made the South happy, and something to hopefully prevent future arguments and future issues. So the Missouri Compromise of 1820 did these three things. It made Missouri a slave state. It created a brand new state out of what used to be part of Massachusetts called Maine. Maine, being way in the north, would be a free state. And then the third thing it did was establish an imaginary line on the map called the 36 degree 30 north line that would divide the country into slave states and free states. Anything north of the line that would be added in future dates would be added as a free state. Any state added to the United States below that imaginary line would come in as a slave state. So the deal essentially created an equal number of slave and free states, 12 free and 12 slave. And the part that both the North and the South seemed to like about this was that there seemed to be a logical way of figuring out if states would be slave or free in the future. So the Missouri Compromise was initially a success. It worked. It kept the North and the South happy for a while. But as time passes, they would grow to be unhappy with this. And further compromises and other laws would have to be passed to try to keep the North and South from splitting up. Another thing we learn that you're going to learn about in this section, read about, is U.S. foreign affairs. By this time, we are a much larger country than we were right after the Revolution. We just concluded another war with Great Britain. Even though it was a draw, we felt like we were the winners. After the War of 1812, we realized as a country that we really need peace, especially with Great Britain, if we want to continue to grow and develop. War is one of the worst things that can happen to a young, developing country, because war is expensive, it's destructive. So we come to the realization that we really want to do our best to not get into future wars with any country of Europe, but especially with Great Britain. So in the years after the War of 1812, for the next 20 years, we're going to focus on trying to improve relations with Great Britain and improving relations with other countries. So 2 treaties would be signed with Great Britain. You don't really have to know these, but what they did was very important. The Resch-Bagot Treaty of 1817 basically demilitarized the Great Lakes. We and Great Britain agreed to not have these huge navies on the Great Lakes, and we also demilitarized the border. We withdrew all troops away from the borders. Then we signed the Convention of 1818. Okay, this was an agreement that established a border between the United States and Canada. Now, we always had a border, but this finalized the border. It would prevent future arguments and misunderstandings about where the borderline is. But most importantly, that Convention of 1818 allowed Americans to settle a place called Oregon. Oregon was a piece of land that was owned by Great Britain. It was west of the Rocky Mountains, and naturally Americans wanted to go live there. It was excellent farmland, actually. So Great Britain allowed us to start settling there. Ever since these treaties, we became very good friends with Great Britain, and actually we become future allies, and we never again fought them. So our relations with Great Britain went from bad to rocky to very, very good after these treaties. Another thing that happens are relations with Spain. We almost go to war with Spain. A man named Andrew Jackson, the hero of the War of 1812, he invades Spanish Florida without permission. You're probably saying, why does he do that? Well, Andrew Jackson was fighting Seminole Indians in Florida, and he pushed them way back into the center of Florida. And while he was there, he attacked Spanish forts, claiming that it was Spain's fault for not controlling the Seminoles. We avoided war with Spain, and we signed an agreement with them in which Florida was given to the USA by Spain. It now becomes a territory, years later become a state. And in return, we give up our claims to Spanish land in Texas. While this is going on, there are rebellions in Latin America. Now, Latin America is what today we call Central America and South America. In 1821, Mexico becomes a free independent country after a revolution against Spain. Shortly later, Venezuela, Panama, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Colombia also become free countries after having revolutions. And in a very short time, Spain loses almost their entire empire. While they're losing their empire, they ask for help from other European countries. They ask France, Austria, Prussia, and Russia for help, military help. This was called the Quadruple Alliance. And when word got back to the United States that Spain was looking for help, military help from other countries of Europe to reestablish colonies in North and South America, which literally border our country, we got very nervous and almost upset. So the president at the time issued the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine stated that the United States would not interfere with any existing European colonies in the Americas, but at the same time, we would not tolerate any new colonies in the Americas. And when I say the Americas, I mean the North and South American continents. Now, the Monroe Doctrine, it looks like it worked, because ever since this was created, there have been no new colonies in North or South America. This has been an important element in U.S. foreign policy for more than 170 years. And we were essentially telling the world that North and South America, these are our neighborhoods. Stay out of our neighborhood. No colonies in our neighborhood. And basically, this Monroe Doctrine sets the tone for American foreign policy for years to come. So those are the main topics of Section 3. Okay? And you'll read about them in further detail for your assignment tonight, or today. And your assignment will be to read pages 321 to 327. That's Section 10, or Chapter 10, Section 3. And then there's some questions to go along with those, and then a couple of videos, one being a video on the Monroe Doctrine. So there'll be links to this attached to the classroom page. And stay connected. Make sure you submit your assignments through Google Classroom. I'm starting to put them into school tools as C for complete, I for incomplete, or if you don't submit anything, I put an M for missing. So make sure you get these in by Thursday. And Thursday there'll be another set of questions and another video lesson. So till then, take care, stay healthy. Hope to see you soon. Bye bye.